I bring news about the 32-inch wheel size, a lot of juicy gossip, the kind of content you'll only find here, which is hardly ever published in official media within the bike industry. I've spent the last few weeks visiting some of the most powerful brands' factories on our continent, both nationally and internationally. I also had the opportunity to have one-on-one sessions with CEOs, engineers, product managers, and commercial directors. I've even been able to test some of the prototypes that are out there. And that has given me the chance to absorb a lot of information they've shared with me about the ambitions with this new 32-inch wheel size, but also about the fears and concerns that exist within the brands. So, being very respectful of the privacy of the conversations I've had with all these people, I'm going to share with you in this video some of the difference, which is the feeling from the end consumer that the bike industry is united and wants to push the whole 32-inch wheel thing on us compared to the reality inside the brands. Because honestly, I see a pretty significant division right now when it comes to the 32-inch issue. A very interesting video is coming up. Stay here, you're going to love it. But first, I'm going to ask you to please hit the subscribe button to help me grow the project. Thank you very much. Let's get right into the video. Before we get started, I want to tell you that Feedback Sports is going to be the sponsor of today's video. If you're into this world, you definitely know them. If you've just arrived, let me tell you that half of the teams in the cross-country and downhill World Cup trust them. Even in the World Tour, there are a lot of teams that use their stands and tools. It's an American brand of very high quality. I would especially highlight that they make all their tools not only with professional mechanics in mind, but also for us, the amateurs, so that in one single set we have everything we need for when we go out on weekends, go to races and so on, so you have everything at hand. Anyway, check them out, their products are really worth it. And that's it, we'll keep going strong with the content. Before we continue, a small warning. Even though there are some small niche brands like Stoll, which has already launched its first 32-inch model and took it to the Cape Epic, where one of the riders on the 32-inch bike won a stage. This, neither for me in particular nor for the bike industry in general, does it mean that the 32-inch models are already on the market? Here, until a brand of certain size and prestige comes and launches its final model on the market, not a prototype, but the final model, we can't say that the 32-inch bikes have truly reached the market. I'm telling you this so you understand and stop repeating. 32-inch bikes already exist, they're already on the market. I'm also leaving aside all those brands of 32 and 36-inch bikes that have been selling bikes for very tall people for years, like basketball players and so on, okay? Here we're discussing a different story that is still to unfold. Bike brands are each fighting their own battle, unlike what most end consumers think. Judging by the comments you leave me on the videos, where do you get the idea that the whole bike industry has united as a single block? What the brands are trying to do is reach an agreement to force a change in wheel standards so that we all have to change our bikes. Quote unquote, all of us. No one is forcing us. No one is putting a gun to our heads. Well, judging by what people inside the brands are telling me, we're not in that situation at all, at least not at the current stage of 32-inch wheel development. Quite the opposite, everyone is fighting their own battle. Let's look at some things that are already public, major brand launches that have happened and that are about to happen soon, so you can understand it better by reading a bit between the lines. To begin with, the Specialized Epic 9 just came out on the market with 29-inch wheels. We have the new Canyon Lux World Cup 29-inch wheels, a launch that just happened. The new Scott Spark, which is already being used on the circuits and its launch is imminent, 29-inch wheels. This weekend, March 9th, you will see at least one more brand that will give one or several of its riders a new 29-inch bike, which will be released to the market very soon. Well, if we analyze case by case, we see that, for example, Specialized and Canyon made a lot of sense to go ahead and launch their new 29-inch bikes because both brands had their cross-country section divided into two models. And this at a time when the industry is in crisis and you need to cut resources everywhere. Well, in the end, going from two models to one optimizes costs in every way. On the other hand, the Scott Spark. How many years has the current Scott Spark been on the market already? Many, more than 5. When the normal cycle for a bike used to be 4 years, and more it's 3, or even 2 as you've seen in the case of Specialized. What's going on with the Scott Spark? Well, most likely they already had the final 29-inch model ready for a long time, for a year or more, but they were waiting to see where the market was heading and if maybe it made sense to get ahead and launch the 32-inch version. That hasn't happened. They're going to launch the 29-inch version. Now then, which is the only powerful pioneering brand that has stopped, is 29-inch launch when it already had it perfectly ready and most likely is getting ready to go straight to a 32-inch launch. Well, if you're paying close attention, you may have realized that it's Trek, because the World Cup riders have been riding for weeks, even months, with what they've called a prototype. But it's actually a fully mature bike that just needed the mass production button pressed to launch it to the market. It really looks like Trek has stopped this whole project to at least take some time, get some distance, look back, gain perspective, and say, well, maybe it makes sense to launch the 32-inch version now. Well, if that happened, it would be amazing. But here's the thing. All the brands we're talking about, including some others like BMC for example, already have their final version of the 32-inch bike ready. I'm not talking about prototypes, but the final version. The development of a bike goes through an initial design phase, then an aluminum prototype, and once that part is validated, it moves on to a carbon prototype. When this part is validated, it moves on to what is usually known as a pilot run or a pilot unit, which is a small production run of 100 to 150 units for the competition team, for marketing, for ambassadors, for display, and so on. And then right before the launch, let's say, when you get to that point, the next step is to press a very big button, which is for mass production. When you press that button, you have to invest a lot of money up front in advance because you're going to ask the factory to make hundreds of thousands of units of your new bike. Well, all these brands we're talking about right now, I'm convinced that they either have the final 32-inch version or they're very close to having it. Therefore, at some point, they found themselves with, do we hit the mass production button for the new 29-inch model we already had ready, or do we hit the mass production button for the 32-inch model? The question is, why haven't they done it yet? For now, what I've been told from inside the brands is that there are a lot of doubts about whether the 32-inch models will be a commercial success. That these are faster bikes for the pros, that probably the entire elite will end up using 32-inch models, I have no doubt about that. But whether that translates to commercial success in the market, that's where some brands see things differently, right? On one hand, there are brands that go all in with this and say, no, 32-inch wheels will be the new standard because it's going to be a better bike for everyone, regardless of your size. We're fully committed to it. Some brands with a more conservative approach say everything must be validated, as this poses many challenges for engineers to achieve. Wow, in terms of geometry, the bike has to be suitable for all heights, so that 2 bottles can fit inside the frame. So that many things we're already used to with today's mature 29-inch bikes aren't lost with those 32s, right? So when you ask the conservatives why these guys here are getting so hyped, what they tell you is because these guys need it more. Those getting hyped want to move faster than they should because their sales aren't going well. I'm not saying that's the case, but it's like a vicious circle. These guys here, the hyped ones, say that the conservatives aren't that innovative and don't have the ability to get ahead in terms of technology and all that. And the conservatives say that the hyped ones are just hyped because they're really not selling the current 29-inch bikes they have in stock, and they need a change of standard to shake things up. Well, what I can tell you is that after talking to both sides, we can see 5 possible potential scenarios that could happen with 32-inch wheels. The first one, which is the one we all more or less have in mind, is that the 32-inch models will appear on the market and completely replace the 29-inch ones. Just like with the 26-inch models, which no longer exist since everything is now 29-inch bikes, the same thing would happen here. Option 2 is that the 32-inch models coexist with the 29-inch ones. Imagine a scenario which we've already experienced with the 26, 27.5 and 29-inch models. Trek was a pioneer or one of the leaders of that philosophy. So imagine a scenario where we have small and medium sizes in 29 inches and large and extra large sizes in 32 inches. A third possible scenario would be that the 32-inch bikes become the best option for the pros and are used in the World Cup, official competitions, UCI events, and so on. And yet, what is sold on a large scale would still be the 29-inch bikes. For this to happen, the UCI regulations would need to change, since the UCI requires that bikes used in the World Cup and official competitions match those sold in stores. But well, you can always use strategies like what happened with car brands, where they made just a few units. Let's imagine maybe a brand releases 32-inch models, only 100 units a year, and there are 100 enthusiasts in the world who buy them because they're amateurs, almost pros, because they have a high level. Am I making this up? But that could be a scenario. Scenario number 4, and this one is very interesting. This is a conversation I had directly with a product manager from a top brand. In this case, he's in charge of road and gravel, but I think it can be applied to mountain biking as well, where his way of approaching the development of this 32-inch bike, it was very different from everything I had found in other factories. And he told me I have to approach the new 32-inch bike as if it were a completely different bike. Let's use a simple example. This is all fantasy, so don't take it out of context. Imagine we're discussing Trek and their super caliber with 29-inch wheels. Instead of calling the new 32-inch bike super caliber, it would be called mega caliber, and then in the catalog they would have the super caliber and the mega caliber. There are always 2 options that the customer could choose from, not based on their size, but based on 2 different types of bikes, just like Specialized has had the Epic World Cup or the Epic 8, so we understand, and one of the differences would be the wheel diameter. What happens with these last 3 scenarios, 2, 3, and 4? They force brands to have duplicate bikes and even duplicate manufacturing processes, everything. And as I mentioned earlier in this video, it's not the best scenario in this time, in this context of crisis within the industry. There's a possibility, a 5th scenario that no one is considering, but for me it's very realistic, and that's that 32-inch bikes become the new fat bikes. I mean, there could be a huge hype around all of this during all this time, all the development and so on, and they actually come out. Maybe the pros will succeed with them, but commercially it might not catch on, and brands might question spending so much on development, engineers, and technology. I'll stick with the 29ers since this isn't catching on. The same thing happened with fat bikes. There was a lot of hype. There was even a specific category for fat bikes in the Titan Desert. And where is all that now? In fact, somewhere there must be a container full of ultralight fat bike frames that Mr. Joseph Agram made with the business vision that this was going to be a new standard. And in the end, it didn't work out. That container of frames must still be somewhere. One thing is clear. Until the component brands catch up, especially forks, tires and wheels, which are currently the main bottleneck preventing leading bicycle brands from launching their 32-inch models, nothing will change, right? But as soon as this gets up and running, they have everything ready. But of course, now we have two situations. On one hand, there are brands that have just launched the E29 model and need at least 2 years to recover the investment made there in terms of R&D, in terms of the stock they will have produced, and so on. On the other hand, although everything's ready, no brand wants to go first. It's like there's this feeling that, just as in other times, the industry rushes to claim the title of I was the first to, I don't know, hide the shock absorber, or I was the first to invent full suspension, or I was the first to invent this gadget, whatever it is. Here it's like there's the feeling that there's much more to lose than to gain, especially because the first 32-inch bike from a leading brand that appears on the market is going to be examined in a very critical way. But maybe there's a chance that there could be a big splash in this regard. Because let's say that the logical evolution of 32-inch bikes in terms of their commercial introduction should be more or less what we're seeing. A very small niche brand like Stoll releases its first model, then more important brands, but still with small volumes, start releasing theirs, right? For example, Niner had been using 29-inch bikes in the United States for years, even when others were switching from 26 to 29 inches. Let's say that in the industry, evolution should move from smaller players to bigger ones, waiting for the big hits from the major brands at the end. But as we saw at the beginning of the video, maybe Trek has something important up its sleeve, and maybe they'll be the first major brand to bet on launching their model with 32-inch wheels. It will be interesting because they're taking a risk. As I mentioned before, being first seems to bring more risk than benefit. If it's a big brand, but on the other hand, it would put Trek back on that path of innovation, of being a disruptor, a brand that makes you go wow. Every time they release something new, you have to pay close attention because, well, they've continued to release really good bikes in recent years. But it's true that maybe they haven't exactly been at the forefront of the latest changes. So let's pay close attention to see what moves Trek might make. Honestly, it has me on edge, really excited to think that this could happen with an American brand like Trek. The million-dollar question. For everyone who wants or needs to change their bike and right now they're like, well, what do I do? Should I buy the 29 that just came out, or should I wait for the 32? Because what if the 29 I buy right now becomes obsolete, since in a year or two they'll release the 32? And also, if that's the new standard, the 32, the 29 is going to be really hard to sell secondhand. So what do we do, right? My opinion, completely independent of what the brands say, and what I would do right now if I had to buy a mountain bike, would be to buy one of the latest 29s that are coming out. Why? Well, basically because the current 29s, the ones that are coming out right now this year, because there have been and there are going to be a lot of launches of 29-inch mountain bikes this year. For me, they are the very essence of 29 mountain bikes. I mean, it's the most mature product the industry has ever been able to offer for the cross-country category in full suspension with 29-inch wheels. And everything new that I'm testing, the previous generation was already very mature and already very good. That's also a good second-hand option for those of you who are looking. But the new generation that's coming out is refined. Well, there aren't going to be any 29-inch bikes more powerful, more beastly than the ones we have now. And yet, if you wait for the 32s that are coming, it will be like with the first 29s that evolved from the 26s, they will be the worst 32s in history. So for me, the summary would be this. Right now you have the chance to buy the best 29 in history or soon, the worst 32 that will ever exist. Think about this. How long did it take to switch from the 26 standard to the 29? It took until the 29 really solidified, with the obstacle of the 27.5 in between, which was at least 5 years. So if today you buy a super mature, super powerful 29, you'll have a bike for the next 5 years and you'll be able to get your money's worth without any problem. Even if later the standard ends up being 32, well, that's my opinion. What do you guys think? Please leave it in the comments. I'm eager to read your opinions. See you in a few days. Be happy. We're going to keep posting interesting videos. So, bye bye.